Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to the first event of the current academic year. As you know by now, it's a wow or a words of wisdom panel discussion on a topic which I'm sure is of tremendous interest to all the participants. We've had tumultuous 2.5 years, what with the pandemic and lockdowns and students attending classes online. I know of some students who have completed their graduation without going to the college even once, or going there maybe just once or twice. At the same time, there are people who have been working from home, and even those who have recently joined have not seen the office building. But things are beginning to change, or at least we feel that they are beginning to change. But then there are certain things that will remain permanent, and I think both the workplace and business education will have to see certain new ways of going about their processes. We have today a very, very enlightened and distinguished panel. And they are going to discuss the current worldwide hiring environment for graduates from business schools, as well as how business schools are preparing their graduates for the future work environment. Before I hand over to my good friend Sangeet Chowfla, who is going to be today's moderator, and he has three, as I said, very distinguished panelists with him, I'm going to request Professor Venkatraman, who is currently officiating as the Dean of FMS. As you all know, that FMS Forum is working on this, on this intellectual platform in conjunction with FMS, and the Dean of FMS is our, he's our patron. Unfortunately, the current Dean, Professor Suneja, is on medical leave, but Professor Venkatraman has very kindly agreed to come on and join us today and say a few words before we jump into the panel discussion. Over to you, Professor Venkatraman.
Thank you, Mr. Rajkumar. It's a pleasure to be here. I have always held the FMS Forum's events at a high esteem. I am glad to be part of this again, distinguished panel members and the audience. First of all, greetings from the faculty and the students of FMS. I am, as I said, delighted to be part of what promises to be a fantastic discussion on a theme of great interest, just mentioned by Mr. Rajkumar, as the pandemic hit us and things got haywire, and right now we are stabilizing, and hopefully we will move forward with whatever kind of salvage that we have been doing in the last couple of months. As a matter of fact, most of us in the business schools live through this core questions that the future of business education almost every day with the students, and the kind of interest the students have shown, the kind of the value systems that they have come to the educational system once again. Suffice to say, the future of business education itself is a matter of great debate. But you have also added a little more complex topic of future of work. And is it the future of work or workplace or its opportunities? That's a bit of a huge, debating points. I'm sure most of us appreciate that business education has multiple stakeholders like students, faculty, industry, and the society at large. And they continue to pose challenges, especially when you see that the value systems are changing quite rapidly and society, and how the business education, which are more like a kind of a carbon copy of some of the Western models, tend to work in Indian context. Post-COVID pandemic, the thought of future of work and workplace evokes even more complex thoughts than just the business education per se. So I thank the FMS Forum for organizing this conversation. I am keenly looking forward to learning from the distinguished panelists, their insights over the years. Back to you, Mr. Rajkumar, or to Mr. Sangeet.
Thank you so much, Professor Venkatraman. Before I hand over to Sangeet, I just want to say that all those participants who have joined us today, in case you have any questions, and I'm sure that this topic should, evoke a lot of questions from you. You are welcome to put your questions on the Q&A box, and at the end, we will take up the queries that you have. So let me now plunge into the session with the introduction of Sangeet Chowfla, who is going to be the moderator. Sangeet Chowfla is the president and CEO of the Graduate Management Admission Council, as an organization of leading graduate business schools and owner of the GMAT, NMAT, and executive assessment exams used by over 7,000 programs worldwide. GMAT also manages MBA.com, businessbecause.com, and the MBA Tours Company. It is a leader in the discovery and evaluation of talent for programs of study in management and business education. The organization's priorities are to promote graduate management education and attract a qualified and diversified candidate pool from around the world. Sangeet was the first Indian to hold this position. Sangeet is a global executive with focus on general management, strategy development, international growth, and new business development. His early career was with Hewlett-Packard Company, in positions in Europe, the Middle East, Asia Pacific, and the US, culminating in his tenure as GM of the Inkjet Media division. Subsequently, Sangeet joined Timeline Ventures, a VC partnership, participating in both acquisition and post-acquisition efforts. He then became the EVP for markets and products of Comviva Technologies, a leading Indian telecommunications software company. He was appointed CEO of GMAC in 2013. A global citizen, Sangeet has lived and worked in India, Dubai, Greece, Germany, Singapore, and the USA. Sangeet received his BA in economics from St. Stephen's College and an MBA from FMS Delhi. He, along with others in the FMS class of 79, worked to support and fund various alumni activities such as Brand FMS, the FMS Student Leadership Award, and now the FMS Forum. It gives me great pleasure to invite Sangeet to now take over and speak. As I was saying, Sangeet was actually my batchmate both at St. Stephen's and at FMS, so it gives me great pleasure to see him here today and along with his co-panelists. Over to you, Sangeet.
Thank you, Rajkumar, and thank you to both FMS and the FMS Forum. I've been really pleased with my association with the FMS Forum and the class of 79. We got together many years ago on this Brand FMS initiative and the Student Leadership Awards, and it's been rewarding being able to work back with my alumni community. So I appreciate the opportunity. Our objective today, as we were putting this together, is to take a bit of is to zoom out a little bit and take a global approach on two interlinked sort of issues. And we decided, even though the audience today is within both the FMS community, but I believe there's a number of participants with either students, prospective students, faculty, alumni from other institutions across the country. but we decided to zoom out a little bit and take a global perspective about what's happening to what we call graduate management education, or the world of business schools, as it's known generally in India. And the two themes that we'll explore today is one is around employability in the short term. I'll share some research, and I'm certain my colleague Megan will share some of the research and data, and I'll introduce her in a little bit. But the other theme is around ongoing relevance, because employability is really the result of the relevance of the education we impart, the skills that we learn, and the values that we bring with us in the workplace. And relevance has been changing as we've been talking about both what the pandemic has done, the changing nature of work in the 21st century, which is becoming much more a knowledge-based economy than a manufacturing-based economy, but also newer things around remote work, the virtual corporation, and areas like that. And I'm fortunate to be joined by two global deans with the deans of business schools with a wide range of experience to share about how they are morphing their particular programs towards making certain that that relevance is sort of maintained. So we're going to zoom in and out on both those themes, employment as it exists today and future relevance, because that's going to affect employability and also our own personal brands as people with MBAs or business degrees out into the future. Like Raj Kamal mentioned, we would love to take your questions. Please pop them into the chat box, and we'll try to sort of build them into the conversation as we go along. So let me introduce the panel. First of all, that I'm joined with Isabelle Bajeux-Besnainou. I hope I pronounced that right, Isabelle. I always trip over that a little bit. My apologies. Is the Dean of the Tepper School of Business at Carnegie Mellon University. Isabelle has extensive experience in business education. She's the 10th dean at the Tepper School, and has been leading a number of significant initiatives around expanding the diversity, equity, and inclusion, cross collaboration, and has really repositioned the brand at Carnegie Mellon. Before that, Isabelle was dean at the Dutta School at McGill University in Canada, and I do believe that she is a native of France, so a real multi-continental and global view of business education. I'm also extremely pleased to be joined by Soumitra Dutta. Soumitra, obviously, as you can tell by his name, is Indian by background. Currently, he is the dean at the Saïd School of Business at the University of Oxford. Before that, he was the founding dean at the S.C. Johnson College of Business at Cornell University. And prior to that, spent nearly 2 decades at INSEAD. So again, multi-continental and a global sort of perspective to business education. And I'm also pleased to be joined by Megan Hendricks. Megan is the executive director of the MBA Career Services Alliance, and that's sort of a sister organization of GMAC. GMAC is an organization of business schools really focused on the flows of students into business education. And Megan's organization is really an association of career services officers and executives within business schools, which are the people who are really responsible to working with the corporate world in making certain that jobs are found, or in terms of India, the placement officers at business schools. And so she has the exit, sort of the other side of the picture than the picture we have. What we're going to do today is I'm going to take the prerogative of the moderator by grabbing the stage for the first 10 minutes to share some data. GMAC also, apart from being the administrator of the GMAT and other exams, is also the premier research organization for business education. That's one of the missions that we have, mission purpose that we have. And we extensively survey people, both from a career services point of view in cooperation with Megan's organization, but also students desiring to get into business schools to take a look at how their careers are sort of progressing. So I'd like to share some of that data to sort of set the stage. And then I'm going to sort of involve the panel and use their expertise to sort of inform us. So to jump into that, I am going to pull up a couple of slides. Hopefully we can get everything sort of working to, let's see. All right, looks like we are there. So GMAC, as I sort of mentioned, occupies a somewhat unique position, and this is my sort of 30-second commercial, if you will, in the sense that we have both we assess talent through the GMAT, the NMAT, and the EA assessments, but we also manage MBA.com, businessbecause.com, the MBA tour company. And as a result of that, you can see all those numbers out on the screen. I'm not going to go into them. We actually have multiple touch points into the window of management education. And as a result of that, we are the premier provider of market intelligence of GME, which is graduate management education. I'm going to talk about two things today. One is the study which we recently published, which is the Corporate Recruiters Survey, where we surveyed nearly 1,000 corporate recruiters from around the world. 38 countries actually were recommended, and about a third of the global Fortune 500. And specifically out here, I'm going to give you a sneak peek on a study which has actually not been published as yet. It will be published early in September, which is our annual enrolled student survey, where we talked to this year about 1,700 enrolled students. These are people from about 300 business schools across the world in about 57 countries. And essentially what we are trying to do is to understand current trends in hiring and compensation and the demand for skills and the perception and satisfaction for both the MBA and the business master's sort of degrees. And essentially what I'll talk a little bit about in terms of India, but really the idea is to give this audience a perspective of what is happening globally when we talk about trends in hiring and compensation of graduates from management education. So the first thing actually that we see is that corporate recruiters, 87% said they were, in the most recent survey, said they were highly confident or confident in the ability of business schools to prepare students for success in their particular organization. You can see out here there are various differences around the world. They're somewhat small. There are sort of survey bias that exists in the way that people answer questions. But the important takeaway I'd leave with you is that from a recruiter's perspective, the products of business schools or the confidence in business education continues to be very strong, as you can see from the data out here. Which then leads to the next question about what's happening with hiring. Because if you're confident, then you should be expecting people to be able to hire the products of business schools. And again, if you take a look, the chart out here shows you their projected hiring of these 940 some recruiters in terms of what the hiring rates they expected from business schools. And we compared that with a similar companion survey, which we did a year ago. And as you can see, the light blue bar on the left of your screen is quite a bit higher than the bar on the right of your screen. So essentially signaling that that confidence level and the winding down of that hiring slump a little bit that we saw during the pandemic is actually leading to much greater demand for people with business school education, which has got to be good for you, for all of us, whether we are educators in business schools or students in business schools or alumni for business schools. This is a strong market, and our product, if you will, and our brand, if you will, is strong. And the other question that we asked at the right of the screen is, well, how do you actually anticipate this playing out? Is it just the result of a short-term shortage that we ended up seeing because we constrained demand during the pandemic and there's a release valve, if you will, or do you really expect it to sort of this increasing demand to continue? And about 2/3 of the respondents essentially said they expect the demand to continue. And you can actually tend to see this if you time series this data, since we do this study every year, and you can see how all of this is playing out by world region. You saw very low demand at the bottom of this particular data set, which is 2009, just after the global financial crisis. You see this continue to being strong, You see a little bit of a dip in some regions of the world, particularly Asia in 2020, but you continue to see very strong demand in terms of hiring trends. So this is what recruiters are telling us. So we just switched this a little bit around enrolled students when we talk to about 1,700 students in these 300 business schools around the world and say, are you really seeing the same thing? Because if recruiters want to hire, you should be getting jobs. And essentially, and we look at data in the sort of May, June timeframe, which is a little 3 months earlier than most of the industry looks at data, because our point is, this is the time when you're kind of getting ready to graduate. And if you're a student who is in an MBA program, you're getting probably a little bit antsy about whether you've got a job out here. And 86% of these students, of these 1,700 students, said that they were already employed. And that's a 6 percentage point increase than what we saw last year. So the recruiters are really putting, if you will, their money in their mouth here. And Asia Pacific, which is the region where we are right now for this audience today, about 9 out of 10 said that they already had jobs. And that's a very strong growth from last year, which was a difficult hiring environment, where only 78% at this particular point of time said they had jobs. Now remember, the placement season is still continuing in many parts of the world, so this number will only get better and better. And the rest of the higher education industry actually talks about employment 3 months after graduation. We tend to talk about it just around the area of graduation. And you see this growth happening in all program types. Full-time MBAs, 83% said they had jobs, versus 79% last year. Professional MBAs, which is essentially, think of this as working MBAs, you can think about it part-time, sometimes some online programs, etc. 91 versus 82%. And masters, some of them are pre-experienced masters, like masters in management, 89 to 77%. So overall, a really good and strong hiring picture at this particular point of time. So what we've really established is recruiters say they value the product of business education. Both recruiters as well as students say, yes, the job environment seems to be pretty strong. The other part that we really have to focus on is really trying to see what's happening to salaries. And you can see out here, one of the things is, of course, salaries, as you can see on the starting salaries for MBAs. You can see in the light blue line on the left have been growing steadily over the years, but in real terms, actually not so much. I mean, that's one of the, because when you adjust it for inflation, not so much. And on the right, you can start seeing starting salaries increasing. This is a little bit US only data, I apologize, for different types of specialized master's programs as well. And again, when we're looking at enrolled students, and we ask them about the salary bump they saw in before their graduate management experience and after their management experience. And this is the 86% who said they already had a job. Overall total comp increased by almost 30%, but you see some fairly sharp differences overall. Full-time MBA students said that they saw between the salary they had before they went into the MBA, about a 60% increase in total compensation, slightly less for professional MBAs, professional programs, which you would sort of expect because these are people who are already in the workforce and they're doing this part-time. So, but they even saw growth as a result of that. And masters, which are largely pre-experienced, is a little bit more fudgy kind of data because some of these people didn't really have jobs because it's early in their particular career. But you can see that really strong growth for the full-time MBA program as reported by these 1,700 students across the world. So again, a really strong and positive picture for business education. The other thing that we are really tracking is, because this audience is really always taking a look at, and India is particularly is unique in terms of the number of what we call global strivers, people who want to work and study around the world. And this is data from the GMAT exam. And what we take a look at is, where do people send scores as a proxy about where people want to end up studying? So the way you think about it is, if you look at the left side block, and if you look at people who took the GMAT in the United States, where did they send their scores? And as you can say, most of them send their scores into the United States. But look at the change which we are seeing in business education in other parts of the world. It's very, very dramatic. And if you look at it, India, for example, which is the fourth block, you can see that in test year 21, the last year we have complete data, since we're just wrapping up test year 22 right now, about a third of the scores were sent to schools in the United States. Look at the growth of Europe, which is the sort of purple sort of box, of Canada, which is the that brightish purple box. I'm sorry, I'm not good with colors, but you can start seeing that this is, people are sending scores. And this is, of course, the Indian population, which is trying to study abroad, which is not the only population that's represented out here, but you can start seeing that this is becoming much more of a global market. And you can see the number of scores sent to the United States as a result are overall declining, while the rest of the world is really beginning to catch up. So it's really a global set of opportunities that exist, is the message that I'd give you in the world of graduate management education. That said, I know a lot of this particular audience is very interested around international hiring generally, as they're looking at international demand. One of the things that we are beginning to find is that hiring of international talent, particularly in the United States, is beginning to bounce back. This year, 43% of US recruiters said that they intend or what, in last year, 43% said that they actually hired international talent, which is an increase from 35% in 2020. So what we've seen is about 40% that said they were hiring international talent. That dropped during the pandemic to about 35%, and it's beginning to bounce back up. And if you talk about hiring intent, about 56% of US recruiters said they either plan to make international hires or are willing to consider international hires. So really the international hiring market, driven by workforce shortages, the recognition of talent, the globalization of supply and demand, is really beginning to heat up after slumping a little bit as a result of the pandemic. I'll skip this a little bit in the interest of time and just summarize. Recruiters certainly have confidence in business school hires. I think we've seen that. This is a good place to be. So those of you who are students in the journey, but those of all you also who have completed that journey are, I would say, in a good place. Hiring intent for business school graduates is very strong. I'd be interested in seeing how Megan's organization thinks about that. Compensation levels are recovering from COVID lows, which is good. International mobility is changing, and I'll defer the conversation of online at this particular point of time. So that's the data that I had to share, and thank you for listening. This point of time, so I really asked the panel to sort of join me at this, perhaps starting with Isabelle actually, is saying, and if you could kick off your conversation in your perspective, about what you've heard and what your schools are seeing about hiring, jobs, and placement. But more importantly, those of you who are the deans, how do you see this playing out into the future? What are the changes in preparing the managers of the future that you foresee as you look at the 21st century economy? And how are you positioning your programs for student success at the end of the day? Isabelle, and then we'll go to Soumitra, and then Megan, maybe we can bookend the two ends of the recruiters' discussions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sangeet, for sharing all of this data. This is actually fascinating to hear about all that. And thanks so much for inviting me to this panel. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. In the US right now, we have a very strong job market. So, placing students has never been that easy. And we're constantly having quite the opposite challenge, which is that companies are trying to convince our students that they would be a good fit for them. So it's a really good position to be in right now when you're getting on the job market. And I believe that's probably true throughout the world in most places, that the job market is really, really strong for new graduates. I think what I'd like to talk about in terms of future of business education is a buzzword that we hear so much right now, which is about flexibility. I'm finding that flexibility is really key when it comes to business education and becoming more and more important as time passes on. The challenge is really that the corporate world is moving at a very fast pace. New technologies are coming in incredibly fast, and there's a lot of adaptability from the corporate world. And we're a little bit in a challenging position in academia, which is that universities are not necessarily moving at a very fast pace. In university, we have, for good reasons, lots of processes in place. We like to build consensus. And when we're thinking about new programs, it is sometimes challenging to be as reactive as we should to make sure that our programs fits with the demands on the market. So that's something that we're really working on in general, is to increase flexibility in order to accommodate students and adapt to their needs. So, right now we're on Zoom and in very different parts of the world, and we're able to do that. Students are asking for more flexibility in the way that they can get their business education. It does include new course offering, new degree programs, flexibility between the different delivery modes, whether it's online, partly online, hybrid, or in person. There's a lot of discussions about stackable certificates right now. So students would come for one certificate and then add these certificates and eventually get a degree. So all of these questions about flexibility are really key in the discussion about what's going on in the business school environment. The other piece that I'd like to mention is how do we prepare students for the short term and then for the long term? And I'd like to take the example of what we're doing here at Carnegie Mellon, which is that our curriculum is really built on 3 fundamental pillars. And these are not business skills, and that's incredibly important for us. The 3 pillars that we're using to build our curriculum is 1, operations research, so optimization methods, 2, organizational behavior, and 3, economics. And what we believe is that with these 3 pillars, we can build the business skills that are accounting, finance, marketing, operations, management, and that allows us to build very strong foundations in order to build these business skills. I think this is an approach that benefits students both in the short term and in the long term. So in the short term, clearly students are placed in jobs post-graduation because they have the business skills that they learned during their time here. In the long term, our curriculum is preparing the students to become lifelong learners because they have the foundations in order to be able to achieve that. It gives them the expertise to work with a diverse group of people, to train them, to tap into different ways of thinking, and to encourage them to constantly learn and expand upon their existing skills. And then the last thing that I would like to mention, and that's really for the medium term and the long term, is that there is one thing that is pretty certain, which is that whatever you're going to learn in business school are not necessarily going to be all of the skills that you'll need throughout your career. And the reskilling and retooling of students is going to become more and more important. It is very important already, but it is going to become even more important. And all of what we're doing in terms of executive education is going to be really important and a very large part of what business schools can offer.
Thank you, Isabelle. Actually, I was going to wait till the end, till all three of the panelists had made the opening comments before I introduced a particular topic, because you've given me such an opening, I cannot resist. So, you talked about flexibility from a point of view of a program point in terms of delivery and access to your programs. But this flexibility, which I think you introduced in terms of reskilling and retooling, the world tomorrow isn't going to be the world today. And I think what COVID taught us is you got to learn everything. You got to have an incredible amount of, I tend to use the word resilience. You got to have a lot of resilience to be a successful manager or leader. But on the other hand, before COVID, a lot of our management education was around, I don't know whether it was about building resilience, because we were moving from a generalist sort of view of learning everything to becoming more and more specialized. So how do you square this drive towards specialization, which is important for the job of today, to this flexibility and resilience as a learner, which sort of demands a more liberal, holistic, broader, generalist kind of view? And I'd love to get the other panelists' view on that as they think about their comments also.
Yeah, so that's an incredibly important point. It is an important point, in particular at the undergraduate level. When we're thinking about undergraduate business education, thinking about it in a very holistic way. And, we're at a very critical age for students between 18 and 22 years old, when teaching them only about business skills would probably be a big mistake. And making sure that these students are getting a lot more depth in other topics, breadth and depth, I would say, in other topics than only the business schools. So that's a very important point. And then at the graduate level, in particular for MBAs, specialized masters might be a little bit different. But in particular for MBAs, this is what we're doing in the way that we're building these business skills on these three pillars that are operations research, economics, and organizational behavior, that are pillars that are there to last and that will be used by the students in their long-term career.
Thank you, Isabelle. Soumitra, I mean, you've obviously been a dean of a leading business school in the United States. Right now, you're leading a great institution in Europe, and I know both you and your predecessor do a lot of work in globalizing the school in different parts of the world. So, what's your perspective around all the topics about jobs, preparing students from a long-term flexibility and resilience?
No, thank you, Sangeet, for your question. Thank you for including me in this panel. And I think you're touching upon some very, very important themes and questions in this discussion. The title for the panel is about the future of business education, the future of work, which are all very big themes. But I think there is an implicit, even bigger theme of what's the future of the world. Because in many ways, the world is getting shaped by business, because business is a great force for influencing and shaping the world around us. And our graduates are, in fact, shaping businesses. So our graduates are, in effect, shaping the world around us. And this is a very important sort of connection that I try to always emphasize to our students, is that they get a great education, but there's a very important responsibility which they carry in helping create a better world. Now, Oxford in particular, there has a very strong orientation towards impact, having a positive impact in the world. And to have a positive impact in the world, you need to be much more broader in perspective. Also, while being able to go deeper, what I term as the T-shaped profiles. So you need to have the vertical part of the T to be able to deep dive into any one domain that you are specialist in. At the same time, you need to have the horizontal part of the T to be able to represent the breadth and depth of the set of issues that today you have to bring to bear to solve any of the large global problems that we are facing. I think today the MBA curriculum has to be adapted, has to be modified, has to be architectured such that students become more sensitive to these big global issues and how you have to bring together different points of view to solve them. At Oxford, just to give an example, we have, I think, at least 3 mandatory courses in the MBA program that really talk about big global challenges, how you address the big global challenges. They talk about the new form of capitalism that is required because the traditional forms have really failed us in many ways. And they talk about the basic change of leadership model that is required to succeed in the world around us. So if you don't actually architect these bigger issues and big impact-oriented questions inside the MBA program, the students don't necessarily will leave the program with those kinds of issues on top of the mind. We want students to have this issue on top of the mind because we want them to go into business and question what they see in the business. They should not take what they see in business today as the status quo. They should not take business today as the way that a business should be in the future. They actually have to go in and act as change agents in businesses. So it's very, very important for us to be able to architect this impact orientation into the program itself. And I think that's what Oxford does particularly well, and I'm happy about that. But having said this, this is a challenge for all business schools today as we look at the future. Now, in particular, also what I would like to say is that when you look at the world around us, the world is changing in a very different ways and different tone as compared to before. So over the next 10, 20 years, we're going to definitely see even sharper geopolitical tensions arise. There is a whole natural tension arising between US and China, which is going to have all kinds of ramifications across the spectrum of geopolitical issues affecting business. Businesses may have to reconfigure the entire value chains. To do that is a massive, massive issue. How do you actually build resilience in value chains? How do you build resilience in talent supply chains, and so on and so forth? There's a whole set of issues around digital and data. We know that digital and data is causing massive disruptions. And in fact, we have only seen what I would say is 10% of the entire digital revolution. 90% of it is going to happen in the next decades. And that's going to be even bigger, even more dramatic than what we have seen. So if we think we have seen the digital revolution and we know what it is, we don't know what we are talking about. Businesses will have to change dramatically and adjust dramatically in light of what is going to happen on the digital front. And of course, in terms of the UN Sustainability Development Goals and climate, there are massive challenges. We are seeing it already, every summer, every winter, we are seeing extreme weather, we are seeing extreme patterns. The data is becoming very clear that the world is not in a very good place. So what we need is to be able to make our graduates much more sensitive, much more sort of to provide the leadership to help businesses change. Because if the current businesses do not change, our world will not be able to achieve the kind of goals they have set for, various climate or environmental issues. So I really think that business education has to change and businesses have to change. And I'm not completely confident that businesses are ready for the change, because I think businesses are often constrained by the short-term pressures on Wall Street and other kinds of, short-term quarterly profit margins and so on. And I don't think businesses are necessarily thinking always in long-term as they need to think. Yes, many are changing. Yes, many are aware of it, but I don't think the process is working fast enough. So you need more change agents. And I think our students can be those change agents in businesses in the future.
Thanks, Soumitra. Begs the question, so you talked about impact. So your student body, like I guess everybody's student body, spans the world, right? But do you feel that impact is different in whether you're in the developing part of the world or the global south as opposed to the developed north? The way students think about it, or the way students need to think about it is different? And if there is a difference, then within your program, how do you kind of foster that thinking? Because I'm not entirely certain that we want students from the developing South, which have a different form of impact, to really think about their careers or their impact only to be around building the enterprise in the developed North, if you know what I mean.
So, what I see right now is that the issues are so interconnected and the world is so interconnected that what Amazon decides as a policy might be in the US does end up affecting what happens in India. And the reverse probably happens in the case of many of the companies that are emerging from emerging markets and going global. We should not forget that today in the Fortune 500, there are more global companies, the large global companies from China than from the US. So this has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And look at the total number of global companies from the South, they're increasing every year. China being the leading factor out there, but certainly they're increasing as a whole. So what is very important is that companies have a global impact. And our students, doesn't matter where they come from, of course, their origins make a difference in terms of what they become sensitive to, but part of our role in business schools is to make them aware of the global interconnectivity, the system-based approach that is required to solve the current issues. So even if you come from India, you need to be aware of how issues are being dealt with in the US, because if your business is going to try and sell to customers in the US, you need to be aware of what the issues are in the US. Similarly, if you're in the US and you're trying to sell to Europe, you need to be aware of how the customers and the companies in Europe actually are facing what kind of challenges on these fronts. So I think this global interconnectivity is very important in thinking. A system-wide approach is very important in how we approach these problems. And we try to incorporate that into the program itself. So we actually make students work in cross-geographical teams. We make them work in cross-disciplinary teams. We partner them with students in other disciplines, not outside the MBA program. The variety of ways of making it happen. But I think it's very important to give them that global perspective and give them the system-wide perspective in the thinking.
Thank you. Thanks, Soumitra. Interesting. So Megan, let's bring you into the conversation. Your organization represents the other side as my organization in some ways. You represent placement officers, as they call them in India, in business schools. Most specifically, do you find that they are looking for something different? Has either through COVID or just generically as a result of some of these changes Isabelle and Soumitra were talking about, are the skills that they are looking for becoming different? And how does that reflect overall to that skill shortage that we end up having? What do they tend to ask you? What are recruiters asking your members?
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me to participate. This is a really interesting conversation. I'm happy to be a part of it. I do have some thoughts on the skills. I also have some statistics to share. So I'll start with that, with kind of the data, and then kind of move into some of the things that you're saying. So just for a little bit of background, you shared a little bit about who we are and who our members are. We have a couple of different research programs that we do throughout the year. One is our recruiting trend survey, and that's when we ask our school members on a global scale to tell us about the fall recruiting compared to the previous year. So we have data from fall 2021 recruiting. And then we also have school level employment data. So our schools provide us with their actual aggregate employment data each year. And so we have the data for the class of 2021 for that as well. So that's kind of where I'm going to be drawing some of the data I'm going to share. And this is all global trends and data. So it's not divided up by country or by region, just to show you. So you know, what we're seeing is largely in agreement with what you shared earlier. We are seeing a significant increase in job postings, both on and off campus. So when I say on campus, I mean the companies that come to do on-campus interviewing at school, and off campus would mean just sending a job posting to the school, but not actually physically being present. Industry-wise, consulting and healthcare have showed the largest increase in the past year. Hospitality showed the largest decrease, which is not too terribly surprising given COVID and what it's done to our economy. So it kind of backs that up. We're also seeing strong interest in STEM positions, technology, you know, no matter whether it's MBAs or specialty master programs across the board. It is still largely a candidate-driven job market, as Isabelle mentioned. We're seeing that globally as well, although that might change in the near term. That's something that's on the minds of career services right now, is if and when that is going to change and how we're going to respond to that. We're seeing earlier recruiting timeframes for recruiters and earlier internship recruitment. So they're wanting to get in and get those students right away, get those offers made and accepted so that they can lock them down, if that makes sense. And also an increase in short-term contracts for students, which traditionally has been not so popular on the MBA side, more on the specialty master side, but we're seeing it across the board now. In terms of international hiring, our research agrees with your predictions. As far as the schools are saying, we are seeing an increase compared with fall 2021, a significant increase. A significant number of schools saw an increase in international hiring for MBAs, as well as specialty masters. And the industries that are strongest for the international, and by international, I mean those who don't have permanent work authorization in their country of residence. So, you know, in the US, that would mean those who don't have permanent work authorization for the United States, and the same for other countries. And so industry-wise, consulting and technology did see the largest increase in the past year for international students as well. As far as the nature of recruiting, continuing virtual internships, those are slowly returning to in-person, but not as quickly as we might have expected. So there's still quite a bit of virtual internships, quite a bit of virtual recruiting. What we're seeing is a mix now from a lot of companies. So maybe they'll do their first round of interviews virtually, and then they come to campus for their second round, or they will skip the campus process altogether and just do the job posting part. And do most if not all virtually. It's saving them a lot of time. And it also, the benefit for companies is it allows more people to be involved in the recruiting process. So you may be able to bring in 4 or 5 people for every interview, whereas if you flew someone to campus, you could only send one. And that helps them make better decisions, to be honest, as well as helps increase the diversity and equity of their recruiting process, because they can have more people involved. And so that has been a positive. And I think that's one of the reasons that companies are kind of keeping that component. In the long term, you know, our members expect hybrid work to continue. Company culture shifts, you know, talking about that flexibility, absolutely are seeing more companies that have to be more flexible, whether they intended to or not. It's kind of the environment is forcing them to be that way for all of the reasons that we talked about. And of course, diversity recruitment is also a big part of that, because it does require them to be more flexible, and continued focus on quantitative skills sets. Analytical programs, both MBAs and specialty masters, are seeing quite a bit of demand from employers. So that is something that we're predicting will continue in the future. As far as specific data, when we looked at the class of 2021, just comparing it, we did like a 3-year analysis of the actual data. So when I say actual data, I mean the employment statistics coming from the schools and the students, whether they did or did not find jobs. We did, similar to your student enrollment data, we did see an increase in the number of students that are not job seeking. So, whereas particularly in the MBA side, a lot of them would come to the MBA program to find another job, not as much, it was a small increase in those non-job seeking students, but still significant enough to raise an eyebrow on our side as well. So that is kind of in agreement with what you're seeing on the enrollment side. And, as far as job offers by graduation, that was up. We saw the largest increase in 3 years this past year, the class of 2021. So, and that was the same for international students as well as domestic students in the country of residence. So 92% overall had accepted an offer by 3 months after graduation, compared to 87% the year before. So that's significant on our side as well. Also saw an increase in internship conversion. So employers are using those internships as a way to fill their pipeline even more so than in the past. And then, to circle back and talk a little bit about the skills. Yeah, I mean, we are definitely seeing the career services members are saying that employers are looking for adaptability, resilience, flexibility, all of those things that we've been talking about. So our data and our anecdotal information is also agreeing with what you're seeing. And at the same time, they are still looking for skills specific to that job function. So going back to the vertical and the horizontal, they're still looking for like financial skills for a financial job, or analytical skills for every job, really, no matter what industry or job. That analytical is high up there. So it's, they want it all. They're looking for both the soft skills and the hard skills, and putting a high priority on both. And students want to have it all, and which is particularly, notable, I think. And career services folks are having to adapt and change the services that they're offering as well. Some of the biggest things that are on their mind are the volume of work, managing uncertainty, staffing challenges. Our industry and career services is not immune to what's happening globally with, turnover. And so they're kind of feeling the burn there, having to do more with less, as they always have, but even more so than normal. And really just managing that virtual versus in-person component of recruiting, when you've got maybe students that want in-person, but employers are still virtual, or vice versa. And it can be challenging to navigate the new world or the new normal that we're in. So I definitely agree with what the other panelists have said in terms of that flexibility. We're definitely seeing that on the employer side and on the career services side.
Megan, you spoke about internships, and actually I didn't raise it. I didn't put it in my data set, but we have exactly the same data that the leading way recruiters think about hiring people, the number one thing, more than on-campus interviews, etc., is really hiring from the internship pool. But with remote work, what wasn't clear to me, and I wonder if you have a perspective or if anybody else has, chime in, many summer internships have been remote. So does that actually limit the opportunity for students to sort of stand out, if you will, in front of the future employer, if that future employer is at the same time? It seems like a little bit of a contradiction, in fact, doesn't it? Because on one side, employers are saying, I'm really interested in recruiting from my internship pool. And on the other hand, that internship pool, as in many cases, is remote. How is that playing out?
Yeah, I think a student who does an internship at a company will still stand out versus a student who doesn't, even if it's remote, because you still have that ability to prove yourself and your ability, even if it's not in person. So you're still going to stand out over students who haven't done that at all. So that's probably why we're still seeing those internship conversions high. And there are obviously challenges with the virtual internships. The largest one being that students don't get a feel for the company as they would if they were in person. So it's almost more on the student side, that the student doesn't have as much information as they'd like to make that decision about accepting that job. But on the employer side, I think, like I said, I think they're still able to evaluate the student maybe not as much so in person, but still able to accomplish what they're looking for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe what we can do is, and feel free, everybody in the panel, to kind of jump in with other questions to other panelists if or any other points. We are sort of through with the starting point of this, and again, encourage anybody in the audience to ask any questions. I've got a couple of questions that have showed up, and I also want to just sort of blend that into this point that people have been that we've been making. We've been talking about flexibility. But from an access point of view. But I'd like to talk about program type, because that's a question that's showing up about, should I be thinking about a pre-experience type of master's program? Should I do an MBA? There's somebody out here who asked and says, I'm 20 years into a corporate career. Should I now be considering an MBA? It's a big time and resource drain for me. And one piece of data I'd like to put into the conversation is the business cycle. We've done this time series analysis going back about 20 years, and we ask companies as part of this recruitment process, one of the questions we ask you is, what are your primary business challenges that you're dealing with? And we tend to categorize, we ask them to pick from 13 or different types of challenges: growth, new product introduction, managing cost, productivity, etc. And we tend to try to club them into the challenges related to growth and the challenges related to cost and productivity. And one of the things that we found was that there is actually a statistically significant correlation between the challenges companies face, which are linked to the business cycle, and the type of talent that they want to hire. Companies, when they're talking about expansion, tend to be gravitating towards MBAs. They're more expensive, but they tend to be more into strategy, new product, market entry, etc. As opposed to companies, when they're talking about productivity and cost, they tend to be looking more for specialized masters. They got a problem, they want that problem to be sort of solved. So we are in this interesting dynamic right now, right? Everybody's talking about both productivity and expansion at the same point of time. So I'd throw it over to the panel. Is where are you seeing any signals between when you're thinking about your MBA program and when you're thinking about and when I talk about specialist masters, maybe about a pre-experience kind of masters? And what advice would you give to somebody who is, let's just say, beginning their work career around, should I be considering a pre-experienced master's right now, or should I be working for 3, 4, 5 years and be thinking about an MBA? Because at that point of time, the opportunity cost of the MBA, both in terms of just the sticker cost of the MBA, as opposed to at this point in time, I have to deal with the opportunity cost of lost wages, it tends to be higher. So anybody wanting to tackle this thorny question?
I'm happy to have a go at it. I think education is something that you can never get enough of. So all of us are continuously learning, and we learn in different ways. For some people, learning happens best in a more specialized program. For others, it happens in a more general program. So I think I would say that there is a fundamental distinction between doing a general business program, MBA, or a master's in management. Then it's a question of, what stage of your life cycle you're taking it in, versus doing a more specialized program in supply chain or in data analytics or some more specialized program. So I would think, I always think of profiles of people as as T-shaped profiles. So you need that vertical, in-depth specialization in domains that are of interest to you. At the same time, you need to have the breadth and the oversight of different issues that you get in a general program. So I don't think it's a question of either or really. I think it's a question of and combining the and. It may not always require two different degrees, but it requires general mindset to basically build both capabilities. So I think today's successful managers and leaders need to be able to learn continuously to build the T-shaped profiles. But then the question of how they do it, whether they do it through short certificate courses, formal degree programs, I think that's a secondary question.
I very much agree with what you said, Soumitra. I think it's the matter of the background of the student also. If you're coming, let's say, from a science background and you're deciding that you want to work more in the business side, then a specialized master's program makes sense for you to start with. Later on, maybe you will need more breadth and in business education, and you could come back for an MBA. If your background is already an undergraduate business education, then maybe the specialized master's doesn't make a lot of sense, and you would wait a little longer and come back for an MBA. So I don't think there's one solution that fits all of the profiles. It really depends on what your first education is, and then where you want to take your career.
Megan, to this particular question, many students in India, so one of the things that we do is we look at prototypical student motivations for getting a business degree. And if you look at students who choose, Indian students who choose to study outside of India, about 6 out of 10 of them type in what we call the archetype of what we call a global striver. This is somebody who wants to build an international career. It's in stark contrast with China, for example, where only about one in 10 tends to be a global striver. And as a result of that, one of the things is a lot of Indian students are trying to build an international career and are then also looking at jobs in other countries or careers and lives in other countries. And there's certainly an immigration component in that. How do you see that? Because one of the questions that I've been asked in the chat is, if I have a degree in India, or maybe a master's degree in India, is the follow-on MBA really the way to get that international career? And do you see a lot of that happening in amongst your constituents? Students from outside the United States, for example, who already have business degrees, getting a second degree now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I would agree with what the other panelists said, and from the career services cycle perspective, I think it's a little bit about filling gaps, right? So it's like, where am I now and where do I want to be after business school, and where do I want to be 5-10 years down the road, and what do I need to add to my portfolio to help me get there, right? And so, to Isabelle's point, if you're changing careers, that's a much different perspective than if you already have experience in the career that you're looking for. So it really is hard to respond on a global perspective because it is such an individual package decision. And that's what the career services teams are doing, is kind of looking at each student individually and saying, where do you want to be? And here are the skills that employers want to see, and here's how you can get it. So for example, you might get an MBA, but do a specialization in data analytics, or get a certificate in data analytics if you want that global, broader perspective. Plus you feel that analytics is something you need to work on. We're seeing a higher demand for data analytics specialty masters than ever before. When the growth of specialty masters first started, 5-6 years ago, a lot of employers didn't know what to do with the degrees because they were in between an undergraduate and an MBA. And so it was almost like a glorified undergraduate. And so, career services staff spent a lot of time talking to companies about what these students bring to the table, which is different for every program and even for every school, because schools use these to differentiate. So it's hard to have a global definition of a data analytics master's program, for example. But I think that challenge has kind of gotten better in the last few years as more programs have grown and employers have started to recognize the skills that these programs bring to the table. But back to your question, I mean, I would still think the MBA does have more of that global acceptance or recognition or perspective, if you will, if that's what the student's looking for. Because the MBA is a more traditional, if you will, degree, and it's been around longer, and it is a little bit more of a common, I won't say common, but you know, everyone knows what an MBA is, right? Everyone doesn't always know what especially master's in global management is from XYZ university compared to their peer, because it may be significantly different in curriculum. So it seems to be more, you know, internationally recognized, the MBA still. And, you know, obviously the long-term goals are important too, because as your statistics show, the salary is traditionally higher for MBAs. So, you know, if a student is looking for that CEO position eventually down the road, the MBA might still be a better fit because that is kind of what it's designed to do, right? Get you into that management role. But if you're really want to stick with finance, for example, and just want to hone in on those skills, then a master's in finance might be a better fit.
I remember one of the raps that the pre-experienced masters, whether specialized or generalized, had was, you know, you mentioned this thing about recruiters or companies didn't know where to place them. And the example I was given at that point of time was that, you know how consulting firms tend to hire undergraduates as analysts and MBAs as associates. And they were hiring people, these pre-experienced masters, as analysts. But there was this mismatch that was happening, that the student thought they had a graduate degree and thought that their aspiration was to be the associate. But there was almost a two-tier or two-class kind of system between in the big four consulting kind of firms, between true MBAs and what they considered was a MIM, which may have been Isabelle's career changer. Actually, you had a graduate degree, but you had a graduate degree because you changed. Megan, do you see that? Are you implying that that's changing now, and the recruiters are beginning to be able to position a master's somewhere clearly in the middle rather than lumping them just with the undergraduates?
Yeah, I think it is changing. Maybe not as fast as we would like. I mean, but it definitely seems to be better than it was 5-6 years ago when we saw the growth, especially in master's programs, because the more students that are out there in the marketplace proving themselves and showing their skills, the more employers are starting to understand what they bring to the table. I do still think there is a little bit of that gap though, but like data analytics in particular seems to be doing better than other specialty master's programs because it is easier to explain what they bring to the table. And that is definitely a skill that all employers want, you know, no matter their industry. So yeah, I do think it's getting better, but I think it still exists for some companies. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we can go back to this point about, you know, the point Soumitra made, which is a sort of more, you know, when we talk about the future of management education and how does this thing become relevant around impact. So, you know, I'm going from hyper tactical about getting a job as a MIM to so here's a question that gets asked is, you sort of implied a little bit, Soumitra, and, you know, Isabelle, please chime in too, and Megan, that the MBA or the business graduate, which is built around a traditional view of the enterprise, let's just call it profit maximization, the Friedman model, if you will, etc., is perhaps not the way to get the maximum amount of impact. And I may be putting a little bit of words in your mouth. It's about a much broader, sustainable, sort of developmental kind of outcome. But the rap that happens is that business schools aren't necessarily leading the charge in building the intellectual framework for that. So if we are saying that the purpose of the enterprise isn't profit, then what is it? And there is this sort of notion, you know, of conscientious capitalism and stuff like that. But is there a sustainable, research-based, SDG-based, if I can say it that way, body of work that is coming out of out of the greater business education community to give us a framework by which the enterprise should think about its role in the world, which is different than just shareholder profit maximization.
So Sangeet, you actually hit the nail on the head. The key word out there is research, and linked to research is faculty, and linked to faculty is faculty incentives. And faculty incentives today are by and large for most top schools driven by research and top research publications, publications and top research journals. And the reality is that these research journals and the faculty are changing, but they're changing far too slowly. So sustainability is still, it's emerging. I'm not questioning that it's not emerging, but it's emerging slowly as a research field of interest. You see that today, even with establishment of, example, at Stanford, the climate school. It's only now that the major universities in the world are setting up dedicated efforts around this important theme of climate, because they realize that climate cannot be solved by one discipline. It's not solved by business alone, cannot be solved by engineering alone. It's a combination of combining different perspectives and different people together. And so what it requires us to do is to do two things. One is we have to push much more aggressively issues around sustainability broadly defined into the research agenda of the school. And that's very hard to do because as a dean, and Isabelle knows this as well as I do, you cannot force the research agenda of the faculty of academic freedom. So you have to seduce them, you have to entice them, you have to convince them in different ways. You cannot force them. But that is a process that has to happen. It has to happen at a faster pace. And second, I think what we have to do is get our faculty to look outside much more. I think a lot of our faculty in business schools tend to be quite inward focused and focus very much on the business clients they work with. But we need to be focused much more on other disciplines across university, and maybe bring in faculty from other disciplines as part of our core faculty inside the business schools. So I think, requiring people just to work with another school sometimes not good enough. Sometimes you have to bring in people from those disciplines into the core of the school. How you do it, of course, is an interesting question, whether you hire them or have some other kind of arrangement. But you need to have a much more outside-in perspective into driving the agenda of business school faculty.
So if I can chip in, very much agree with all of that. I think the research part is incredibly important. And as Soumitra said, we cannot tell faculty what they should be doing in their research. But one thing that we can do, though, is when we're hiring, having particular directions where we want the school to go to, and that's the piece where we can actually shift the way that people are thinking about research. I also strongly believe that the way that universities are structured right now are very much siloed, and in particular business schools. And if you take the case of Europe, not in Oxford, but in a lot of countries in Europe, business schools are independent. And that's a real issue. And they're trying to build these bridges with engineering schools, schools of humanities, medicine. But it is quite impossible, I think, to think about bringing business solutions without having these bridges with the other disciplines. And that is becoming even more important. And we need to break these silos. I'm incredibly lucky to be in a university where the culture here is really interdisciplinary and has been that way forever, because changing the culture within a university is probably the most difficult thing to do. But we need to break these silos, in particular for business schools, if we want to be able to participate in solving the big problems of our time.
Yeah, sort of, there's a kind of related, I'm looking at a question out here. We're not kind of rephrase that a little bit, and apologies to the questioner, and expand that. It was a two-part question. One is about the difference between an international MBA and a developing country MBA, and why, the question says why there's a stigma. I mean, let me just try to address that. One of the things we've been tracking is, if you think about, one of the objective ways is, I know it's a little bit commercial in nature, but we look at salary differentials between international MBAs and domestic MBAs in developing countries. And we are finding that that gap has been narrowing. In some countries like China, it's negative in the sense that the domestic MBA actually commands a higher salary than an international MBA, with the exception of the few really elite sort of institutions. You're seeing the same thing happening in India, where a student from a top-notch school in India commands roughly the same salary as a student with a degree from an international MBA. So maybe, I don't think there's a stigma, and I think it's beginning to come together. But the second part of the question was around, the question says, are the challenges in business static in nature? Or there was a proposition that they are static in nature. And I think what we are talking about is that they're not. That the challenges of business have to keep changing. And while certain elements may be somewhat static, the shape of a balance sheet on a P&L statement, though even that keeps changing, that business is not a static development, that it needs to keep up with the times, if you will, and it needs to keep up with the challenges that the world is facing. And the successful leaders of the future, the business leaders of the future, are the ones that are going to be able to, we talked about reskilling, just constantly being able to deal with not just business challenges, but social challenges. I mean, business leaders are being asked to deal with more and more social challenges that they've ever been in the past. And I just wanted to use this question as a way to sort of make that point. I mean, would you agree? And even from a hiring point of view, Megan, I mean, is it true, and I may be leading with the answer already, that recruiters are actually, corporations are actually looking to recruit people who have a broader social framework to think about rather than just technical skills?
Absolutely. And I think the virtual world has made it easier for them to find those students too. Because I talked earlier about not going to campus as much and, doing more of the virtual recruiting, and that has helped them broaden their perspective. So yeah, I absolutely agree.
So if I can pitch in on that, I agree. I worry a little bit about thinking about our students as commodities. And I think a virtual environment is actually reinforcing that notion. And I've heard, people, you hear about people switching jobs at a very high pace right now. And for some of them, the only thing they're switching is their computer. So they give by their laptop, they get a new laptop, they stay in the same place. They don't know anything about the company culture. And honestly, they don't care, maybe. And they're producing work that is helpful for the company, but there's no loyalty to the company anymore. There's no sense of belonging into a particular culture. And I really, really worry about that trend that we're seeing. When we were teaching 100% online at the peak of the pandemic, and our observations was that in terms of the learning objectives, we had absolutely no issues. Actually, the students learned really well online, and we were checking all the marks in terms of learning objectives. Where we didn't know what to do, and we couldn't crack actually how to do that, was really in terms of the social aspects of being part of an MBA program, for example. And there's only so much, happy hour that you can do on Zoom without not wanting to do that anymore for very good reasons. And we were trying lots of different things on Zoom, and we couldn't figure that out at all. And I don't think that anybody could figure that out. Or maybe I haven't heard about it. But I have the feeling that more and more the talents within companies are being thought as more commodities. We're going to use these skills, and then we don't have a sense of loyalty to that employee, and the employee doesn't have a sense of loyalty to the company either.
You're so right, Isabelle. I mean, if I can just speak from my own experience as a CEO of a fairly global kind of organization, the biggest thing I worry about is culture loss, if you will. And it's both sides, right? We've had people who've joined us and left us, and we've never met them. So they have been actually a transaction. But so I worry about it from the culture of my organization, but then to our audience who are thinking about this, I'd encourage them to maybe, we're running out of time, as a leaving messages, think about your cultural loss in terms of as a result of this, because you've lost the mentorship, you've lost that workplace learning, and the workplace is so much more than this particular job or this particular sort of task. So the workplace dynamic that we see today just is very disturbing to me, because we've lost organizational culture. But I think a lot of the people who work for us have also lost a lot of mentoring, learning, the infamous, chai shop, chai time kind of conversation, if I were to use the Indian phrase. We lose that. I mean, how much did we all learn from watching somebody else do something just by being there? And we don't see any of that any longer. And that's potentially a major loss of what we are seeing. And it leads to, you've got a very relevant term, the commoditization of talent. And if we view talent as a commodity, or talent themselves begin to start viewing themselves as commodity, going to the highest bidder at all points of time, then it's like wheat, right? It's whoever pays me more, that's where I'm going to go. It may not necessarily lead to the right outcome. Sorry, Megan, were you trying to come in?
Yeah, I was going to say what we're seeing from employers is preference for hybrid work versus 100% remote. And I think that might be why, is they don't want to lose that. They want to be flexible enough to capture the people who want that flexibility, while also having some kind of requirement to be in the office for a certain part of the time so that you don't lose that. The challenge for the employers is that there are still students who are demanding the 100% remote, and they want to hire those students, so yeah, I mean, but I think that's why we're seeing a lot of companies that don't want the 100% remote. They're trying to do hybrid so they can be flexible while still, keeping that culture.
Yeah, I sort of worry about this, the talent which is demanding 100% remote. I know short term it may work, but long term it may have an unfortunate impact. We are at the end of our time, and I didn't want to finish on time. So Isabelle, Soumitra, Megan, thank you so much. Thank you for the FMS Forum. It's always great to have these opportunities to hook up with my colleagues in management education. We are talking about everybody else are working on remote, but we all don't get to talk to each other the way we used to talk to. So these opportunities are just useful for ourselves, and hopefully it's useful for the audience. So thank you all.